Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Massachusetts. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1901, when the Wainwright family name first began to fade from Salem's public records. Not through any natural disaster or clerical error, but through what some might call a collective agreement to forget. Even now, if you were to visit the Essex County Archives and request information about the Wainwright estate that once stood at the northern edge of town, you would likely be met with confusion or, more tellingly, uncomfortable silence. The property itself was located approximately 3 miles north of Salem's town center, nestled between two low-lying hills that sheltered it from coastal winds. According to land registry documents dated 1878, the estate encompassed 78 acres of woodland and fields, with a main house that featured an unusual design for properties in that region. 3 full stories of weathered clapboard with a distinct asymmetrical layout that locals often remarked upon. What makes the Wainwright case particularly unsettling is not merely what allegedly happened there, but how thoroughly the family's existence was subsequently erased from local memory. While researching this case, we discovered that several pages had been physically removed from town census records between 1900 and 1910. Property tax documentation shows similar inconsistencies, with entries concerning the northern estate simply missing after 1902. It was through a collection of personal correspondence discovered in 1973 during renovations to the old post office building on Essex Street that we first learned of Harold Wainwright, the family patriarch. According to these letters, exchanged between the postmaster and a Boston attorney, Harold was a man of considerable means, but my limited social standing. He had apparently made his fortune through lumber interests in Maine before relocating to Salem in the late 1870s. A weathered photograph discovered among these documents shows Harold as a stern-faced man with a prominent beard and deep-set eyes that seemed to reflect little emotion. Behind him stood a woman presumed to be his wife, Eleanor, whose expression was equally unreadable. The photograph's backdrop revealed portions of the main house's eastern facade, including what appeared to be an unusual cellar entrance, larger than typical for homes of that era. By all accounts, the Wainwrights kept to themselves. Their property was enclosed by a stone wall along the perimeter, and visitors were reportedly rare. The family employed a small staff, though records indicate unusually high turnover among household employees. A handwritten ledger from Crowley's General Store shows regular large orders delivered to the estate, suggesting the family rarely ventured into town themselves. It was in the autumn of 1901 when Elizabeth Marsh, a seamstress from Salem, was engaged to create several garments for the Wainwright household. According to her diary, recovered from her granddaughter's attic in 1966, Elizabeth made 3 visits to the estate during September of that year. Her entries describe the interior of the home in unsettling detail, rooms that seemed arranged with theatrical precision, furniture positioned to create the impression of normalcy while somehow achieving the opposite effect. "I find myself unwilling to turn my back to certain doorways," she wrote on September 17th. "The house is immaculate, yet there is a persistent odor I cannot identify, not unpleasant but unfamiliar, like earth from a place one has never visited. The children are quiet beyond what seems natural." The children Elizabeth referred to were the 4 Wainwright offspring, twins Robert and Richard, aged 17 at the time, daughter Margaret, aged 15, and the youngest, Thomas, who would have been 12. School records show that none of the children attended public education, with Harold Wainwright having successfully petitioned for home instruction privileges based on religious considerations, though the specific denomination was never clearly documented. Elizabeth's diary entries grow increasingly uneasy with each visit. On her final trip to the estate on September 29th, she noted, Today I was taken to the upper floor to measure young Thomas for new shirts. The boy did not speak a single word during the entire process. His skin is pale, beyond what seems healthy. When I commented on this to Mrs. Wainwright, suggesting perhaps more time outdoors, she responded that Thomas prefers the lower spaces of the home, a curious phrasing that has remained with me. What happened in the weeks following Elizabeth's final visit remains largely conjecture. What we do know, based on carefully cross-referenced accounts, is that on October 21, 1901, the town constable received reports of unusual activity at the Wainwright property. According to his log, which survived in partial form through a copy maintained by his deputy, several local farmers reported seeing smoke rising from the estate in the pre-dawn hours, not from the chimneys but from somewhere at the rear of the property. When Constable James Holcomb arrived at the estate later that morning, he noted that the front gates were unlocked, apparently unusual based on his comments. His official report describes the main house as appearing undisturbed, but notes that Harold Wainwright was unusually agitated and reluctant to permit a full inspection of the grounds. The constable recorded no specific findings of concern, though he mentioned that several outbuildings appeared to have been recently emptied of contents. 3 days later, on October 24th, a local man named George Porter, who occasionally performed maintenance work at neighboring properties, reported something troubling to the constable. According to the statement, portions of which were later published in redacted form in the Salem Evening News, Porter had observed considerable activity at the estate during nighttime hours, multiple lanterns moving about the grounds, and what he described as a wagon heavily laden departing toward the Northwoods Road, well after midnight. What elevates Porter's account from mere curiosity to something more disturbing is what he reported hearing. Sounds unlike any animal known to these parts. When pressed by the constable to be more specific, Porter reportedly said, "Like a person trying to recall how to speak after too long without practice." This statement was struck from the official record, but preserved in a personal letter the constable sent to a colleague in Boston seeking advice. By the end of October 1901, unusual patterns began emerging in local records. The Wainwright children, previously homeschooled, were suddenly enrolled in educational institutions outside Massachusetts, Robert and Richard at a private academy in Pennsylvania, according to a tuition receipt found among the family's banking records, Margaret at a finishing school in Connecticut, and young Thomas supposedly sent to stay with relatives in Virginia, though no record of these relatives has ever been located. Harold and Eleanor Wainwright themselves began making frequent trips to Boston, documented through hotel registers and purchase records. A clerk at Filene's department store noted in a personal journal that Mrs. Wainwright purchased an excessive quantity of linens and seemed particularly concerned with their durability, asking repeatedly if they could withstand unusual staining. Throughout November, activity at the estate appeared to diminish. Deliveries from local merchants ceased entirely by the middle of the month. The groundskeeper, a man named Joseph Winters, who had remarkably remained in the Wainwrights' employ for nearly 3 years, far longer than any other staff, abruptly left Salem. A distant cousin in New Hampshire later told investigators that Winters arrived at her home in the middle of the night, refusing to explain his sudden appearance, except to say that he would never return to Essex County for any sum. By December 1st, 1901, the Wainwright family's presence in Salem had been reduced to little more than paperwork. Tax records show Harold Wainwright paid his property dues for the coming year on December 3rd, the last official transaction bearing his name in Salem records. The estate itself stood seemingly abandoned, though legally still owned by the family. What happened within those walls during the autumn of 1901 might have remained entirely unknown were it not for a severe storm that struck the North Shore in January 1902. Heavy rainfall and flooding affected numerous properties, including the Wainwright estate. It was in the aftermath of this storm that the first truly disturbing discovery was made, one that would set in motion the systematic erasure of the family from Salem's history. According to a water damage assessment document filed with the Essex County Insurance Adjuster, a document that itself disappeared from records by 1910 but was preserved in duplicate among private papers of the adjuster, flooding had caused significant damage to the Wainwright property's cellar. The adjuster, a man named Philip Garrett, arrived to inspect the damage on January 12th. Garrett's official report is a model of professional restraint. It notes structural concerns regarding the foundation, water infiltration patterns, and estimated repair costs. What the report does not mention, but what Garrett confided in a private letter to his brother, a doctor in Boston, was what he discovered beneath the original cellar floor. The flooding had exposed a secondary space, Garrett wrote to his brother on January 15th, a room beneath the cellar itself, accessed through what appeared to be a recently constructed opening in the stone foundation. The space extended considerably beyond the footprint of the house, suggesting it had been excavated separately and with great effort. The water had receded enough to reveal the floor of this lower chamber, which bore unusual markings, channels carved into the stone in patterns I cannot explain. I observed what appeared to be metal fixtures embedded at regular intervals. The air carried an odor unlike any I have encountered in my 15 years of assessing property damage. Garrett's letter continues with a detail he found particularly unsettling. Along one wall stood a series of wooden cabinets with glass fronts, similar to those found in medical facilities. Though empty when I discovered them, the cabinets showed evidence of recent use, fresh scratches on the interior surfaces, and what appeared to be labels recently removed. Most troubling was a ledger I discovered partially submerged in the remaining water. Though much of the ink had run, making most entries illegible, I could discern dates spanning the previous autumn and what appeared to be measurements, both numerical values and more disturbing notations, such as diminishing response and unexpected adaptation. The insurance adjuster concluded his letter with a passage that explains much about what followed. I completed my inspection and secured the property as required by my professional obligations. They asked detailed questions about my findings, made notes I was not permitted to see, and eventually informed me that my official report should contain only those details pertinent to the insurance claim. The judge himself suggested that certain discoveries might prove unnecessarily disturbing to public sensibilities. I understood their meaning clearly. Judge William Holbrook, whose influence in Salem extended well beyond his judicial role, appears to have been the primary architect of what followed. Upon returning to Salem, I felt compelled to share my observations with Judge Holbrook, who listened with increasing concern. By evening, I was summoned to a private meeting with several prominent citizens. Town Council minutes from January 19th, accessed through a private collection, as the official copy has been misplaced from public records, contain a carefully worded motion to create a special committee for addressing concerns regarding abandoned properties in the Northern District. No specific properties were named, but the committee was granted unusual authority to act without further council approval. By February 1902, a series of curious transactions began. The Wainwright property was not sold. Its ownership remained officially with the family, but various municipal easements were suddenly approved, allowing the town unexpected access to portions of the estate. Work crews were dispatched to what was described in requisition forms as drainage improvements, though the workers were all brought in from outside Salem and housed separately from local laborers. A Boston architectural firm received a substantial payment from Salem's municipal fund for unspecified structural modifications during this same period. When we attempted to locate these architectural plans during our research, we were informed that a fire in 1917 had destroyed all records from this particular firm. A convenient explanation contradicted by the fact that the firm continued operations until 1931, with many other projects from the same era still well documented. Throughout the spring of 1902, the activities at the Wainwright estate remained shielded from public view. A temporary fence was erected around the property ostensibly for safety reasons. Local newspaper accounts from this period are notably silent regarding the estate, though one editorial in the Salem Evening News obliquely referenced necessary measures being taken to address certain irregularities in the Northern District. Harold Wainwright himself made one final documented appearance in Salem on April 3, 1902. His signature appears on a series of documents filed with the county clerk, papers that effectively transferred oversight of the property to a trust administered by 3 local businessmen with close ties to Judge Holbrook. The documents include unusual provisions prohibiting excavation or significant structural modifications without unanimous approval from both the trustees and the town council. What became of Harold and Eleanor Wainwright after this point remains unclear. Banking records show their accounts were closed in May 1902, with substantial sums transferred to a Boston bank. Passenger manifests from the Port of Boston include entries for a H. Wainwright and wife, departing for Liverpool on the steamship Carpathia on May 28. Whether they ever returned to American shores is unknown. The 4 Wainwright children present an even more disturbing gap in the historical record. Despite the earlier documentation of their enrollment in various schools, no academic records exist for any of them beyond initial registration. Inquiries made to these institutions in the 1970s yielded identical responses. No students by those names ever attended classes there. It was not until 1919, during a review of county property records, that a clerk named Abigail Foster noticed discrepancies in the documentation of the Wainwright estate. By this time, the property had been effectively abandoned for nearly 2 decades, though its ownership status remained unusually complex. According to Ms. Foster's personal journal, discovered among her effects after her death in 1942, she became increasingly troubled by the inconsistencies she found. The property appears in tax records, yet no taxes have been collected, she wrote. Easements exist without proper documentation of approval. Most concerning, the original deed and subsequent transfers contain different descriptions of the property boundaries, as though the land itself had somehow been redefined. Foster's curiosity led her to visit the now overgrown estate in the summer of 1919. What she found there disturbed her sufficiently to document it in detail. The house stands largely intact, though weathered by years of neglect. Access to the ground floor is prevented by boards covering all doors and windows, secured not merely with nails, but with peculiar metal fixtures I have not seen used elsewhere. More curious still are the concrete structures scattered across the rear portion of the property, 5 rectangular blocks approximately 15 feet long and 8 feet wide, with no visible purpose. They appear to have been poured many years ago as vegetation has grown around, but not upon them, she continued. Most unsettling was my discovery near the old well house. The ground has subsided in a perfect circle approximately 12 feet in diameter. At the center of this depression, a metal grate has been installed, secured with a lock of unusual design. When I stood beside this grate, I became aware of air moving upward from below, not the cool dampness one might expect from a well or natural formation, but air that felt somehow processed. It carried a scent I found immediately repulsive, yet difficult to identify. I departed shortly thereafter, unable to shake the sense that the property was not as abandoned as it appeared. Foster brought her concerns to her supervisor at the county records office, a man who had held his position since before the Wainwrights' departure. According to her journal, his response was immediate and severe. Mr. Sullivan turned quite pale when I mentioned the estate. He demanded to know who had authorized my visit, then instructed me never to return to the property or discuss it further. When I pressed him about the irregularities in the records, he informed me that certain properties were maintained in special status by order of county authorities, and that further inquiry would result in my immediate dismissal. His hands trembled as he spoke. 2 weeks after this confrontation, Foster arrived at work to find her desk reassigned and the Wainwright files no longer accessible to her. Though she retained her position, she was transferred to responsibilities that kept her away from property records entirely. Her journal entries regarding the Wainwright estate cease after a final notation. I encountered Judge Carver at the library today. When he recognized me, he asked directly if I had satisfied my curiosity about the northern matter. I had never discussed the property with him. His knowledge of my interest came from some other source. He suggested that historical research of a personal nature could lead to unfortunate misunderstandings. I understood his meaning perfectly. For the next several years, the Wainwright estate remained officially in trust, though no activity was recorded there. Local residents apparently understood that the property was to be avoided, though when interviewed decades later, none could explain exactly why or how this understanding had been established. In 1921, a series of unusual events brought renewed attention to the forgotten estate. Construction of a new county road required surveys of adjacent properties, including portions of the former Wainwright land. According to field notes kept by surveyor Thomas Blackwood, the survey team encountered unexpected difficulties when attempting to map the northern boundary. Compass readings become erratic within 50 yards of the stone wall, Blackwood wrote. 2 separate instruments showed variations of up to 40 degrees from expected values. More troubling were the inconsistencies in chain measurements. Distances that should have remained constant somehow varied with each repetition. After 3 days of increasingly frustrating efforts, we were visited by town manager Phillips, who informed us that the road alignment had been adjusted, and our services were no longer required in that sector. No explanation was offered for this sudden change. What Blackwood did not record in his official report, but later described in a letter to a colleague in New York, was a discovery made by one of his assistants. The young man, while taking measurements near one of the concrete structures Foster had noted 2 years earlier, dropped an iron stake into a narrow crack that had formed at one edge of the concrete. According to Blackwood's letter, the lad reported hearing the stake strike something metallic after falling what he estimated to be 20 feet or more. More disturbing was his claim that shortly after impact, a sound emerged from the opening, a sound he described as mechanical yet organic, like clockwork made of something other than metal. The boy was sufficiently disturbed that he left my employ the following day. The road project was indeed rerouted, adding considerable expense and time to its completion. County records contain a terse explanation citing unsuitable ground conditions, though no soil testing reports are included to support this claim. More telling is a budget allocation approved the following week for specialized maintenance at 5 unnamed locations in the Northern District, the exact number of concrete structures noted on the Wainwright property. By this time, a pattern had clearly emerged. Any official inquiry into the estate was quickly diverted. Those involved were discouraged from further investigation, and records were subsequently altered or removed entirely. This systematic erasure might have continued indefinitely had it not been for a chance discovery in the spring of 1921. Jonathan Pierce, a botany professor from Miskatonic University in Arkham, was conducting a survey of rare flora in Essex County when he unknowingly crossed onto the Wainwright property. His field journal, preserved in the university's special collections, contains detailed notes about unusual plant growth patterns he observed there. The vegetation surrounding the abandoned structures exhibits characteristics inconsistent with the broader ecosystem, Pierce wrote. Circular patterns of stunted growth alternate with areas of unusual fecundity. Most notable are the fungi proliferating near the concrete installations, species that typically require very specific conditions not naturally occurring in this region. Pierce, whose academic focus made him less susceptible to local pressures, collected numerous samples before being confronted by a county official who insisted he was trespassing. Rather than surrendering his specimens as demanded, Pierce claimed to have discarded them, while in fact preserving several for laboratory analysis. His findings, documented in a paper that was accepted for publication, but mysteriously withdrawn just before printing, described fungal specimens with highly anomalous characteristics, including cellular structures not previously documented in North American species. More disturbing than the fungi themselves was Pierce's account of their growth medium. These specimens were collected from a substance initially mistaken for unusual soil, he wrote in his suppressed paper. Laboratory analysis reveals it to be primarily composed of organic matter that has undergone advanced decomposition and subsequent chemical alteration. Of particular note are the microscopic fragments of what appear to be bone and tissue that have been subjected to processes inconsistent with natural decay. Pierce's academic career suffered an abrupt reversal following his research. University records indicate he was denied tenure despite previously favorable reviews, and eventually relegated to teaching introductory courses until his early retirement in 1927. His field journals from subsequent years contain no further mention of the Wainwright property or his findings there. In the autumn of 1921, a severe storm, similar to the one that had exposed the hidden cellar chamber nearly 20 years earlier, once again altered the physical landscape of the estate. According to meteorological records, over 7 inches of rain fell in a 24-hour period on October 20th and 21st. The resulting flooding caused significant erosion throughout the area, including a major landslide on the eastern edge of the Wainwright property. It was this landslide that led to perhaps the most concrete evidence regarding what had occurred at the estate 2 decades earlier. The shifting earth exposed a previously buried structure, not directly connected to the main house, but apparently linked to the network beneath it. A report filed by County Engineer Walter Harrington describes it as a concrete bunker of advanced design approximately 30 feet square with walls 18 inches thick. The report notes that the structure's roof had partially collapsed, allowing access to its interior. What happened next is documented in several sources, though all official records were subsequently altered or removed entirely. We have reconstructed events through private correspondence, journal entries, and one remarkable document, the initial draft of Harrington's report, preserved only because his secretary maintained a personal copy that remained undiscovered until 1968. According to this draft, Harrington and 2 assistants entered the exposed structure on October 23, 1921. What they found inside defied easy explanation. The chamber contains equipment of unusual design, apparently custom manufactured for specific purposes I cannot determine. Glass vessels connected by copper tubing line the western wall. A central platform of stone bears channels similar to those reported in the cellar chamber 20 years prior. Most disturbing are the cabinet drawers along the eastern wall, each bearing a numbered label, but no further identification. Harrington's description continues with clinical detachment that somehow heightens the horror of his discoveries. Drawer number 7, when opened, was found to contain preserved organic specimens suspended in a clear solution. The specimens appeared to be human fingers, systematically altered through what might be surgical procedures. Metal implements have been inserted beneath the nail beds, with fine wires extending through the tissue. Drawer number 8 contained similar modifications to what appear to be human ears, while number 9 held specimens. I decline to describe further except to note that extensive modifications are evident. The engineer's report indicates he immediately contacted county authorities, who arrived within hours and established a secure perimeter around the site. Judge Frederick Whitmore, who had succeeded Judge Holbrook as the most influential judicial figure in the area, personally took possession of all materials removed from the structure, according to Harrington's account. What followed was perhaps the most coordinated effort yet to eliminate all evidence regarding the Wainwright estate. Within 48 hours, the exposed structure had been completely demolished, its contents removed to an undisclosed location. An emergency session of the county commissioners was held on October 26th, with minutes that contain only a vague reference to addressing a hazardous condition on county-administered property. Financial records show an unusual disbursement of funds to a Boston law firm specializing in real estate transactions, and within 2 weeks, the entire former Wainwright estate had been officially transferred to Salem Historical Conservation Trust, an entity that appears to have been created solely for this purpose and never engaged in any other activities. Workers were brought in from outside the county, housed in a segregated camp, and reportedly transported away immediately upon completion of their task. Harrington himself was reassigned to projects in the western part of the state. His personal journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1942, contains only one reference to the incident. Some discoveries are not meant to be preserved in memory, let alone record. I now understand the necessity of certain silences. The most telling response came from an unexpected source. Archived telegrams from the Essex County Sheriff's Office include an exchange with authorities in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Virginia, the states where the Wainwright children had supposedly been sent 20 years earlier. The inquiries, carefully worded to avoid specifics, requested information about certain individuals related to an ongoing investigation. The responses, received over several days in early November 1921, all contained variations of the same message. No trace of anyone by those names could be found. A final disturbing piece of evidence emerged in December 1921. A Boston physician named Dr. Morris Cavendish contacted Salem authorities regarding a patient recently admitted to his private sanitarium. According to his letter, preserved only because it was misfiled in unrelated court records, the patient, an elderly man, had been found wandering near North Station in a state of extreme disorientation. The gentleman carried no identification, Dr. Cavendish wrote, but repeatedly identified himself as Harold Wainwright of Salem. His mental condition is severely deteriorated, with periods of lucidity interspersed with troubling episodes during which he speaks of the work continuing beneath and the children's transformation. Most concerning are his detailed descriptions of surgical procedures that appear to have no legitimate medical purpose. The doctor's letter continues, "During one moment of clarity, the patient provided specific directions to what he claimed was his former residence north of Salem. He became extremely agitated when discussing the property's cellar, insisting that they must have found what was beneath by now, and that the lower chambers would have continued their function even without maintenance. When I inquired as to the nature of this function, his response was both precise and disturbing: the adaptation of human tissue to receive and transmit at frequencies beyond normal perception. He then suffered a severe seizure, after which his cognitive function declined precipitously. Salem authorities responded with remarkable speed. Within 24 hours of receiving Cavendish's letter, 2 county officials arrived at the Boston sanitarium. No record exists of their visit in official logs, but the doctor's private notes indicate they spent several hours with the patient and departed with all personal effects that had been in his possession. 3 days later, Dr. Cavendish received a substantial payment from Salem County funds for professional consultation services, though no record of any contract exists. The patient, identified as Harold Wainwright, died on December 17, 1921. His death certificate, filed in Suffolk County rather than Essex, lists the cause as natural causes consequent to advanced age. No autopsy was performed, and the body was released to individuals claiming to be distant relatives, their identities never verified. The burial location remains unknown. By 1922, the systematic erasure of the Wainwright family from Salem's official memory was nearly complete. Maps of the area were redrawn to obscure the estate's boundaries. Property records were altered to suggest the land had always been held in conservation. Most effectively, a kind of social silence descended over the entire matter. Residents simply did not discuss the property or its former occupants. This silence might have been permanent had it not been for a junior archivist named Daniel Pickman, who, in 1973, discovered the cache of documents during renovations to the old post office building. Pickman, unaware of the history surrounding the materials he found, began cataloging them according to standard procedures. His inventory notes mention correspondence regarding the Wainwright family property and unusual building specifications for cellar modifications. Within days of beginning this work, Pickman was reassigned to another department. The documents he had been processing were removed by county officials for what was described as specialized conservation treatment. They were never returned to the archive. When Pickman made inquiries about their status several months later, he was informed that no such materials had ever been accessioned, despite his detailed inventory notes. Pickman might have left the matter there had he not mentioned his discovery to his grandfather, a retired banker who had lived in Salem his entire life. According to Pickman's journal, his grandfather became visibly disturbed by the mention of the Wainwright name and warned him to leave buried things undisturbed. This cryptic response only heightened Pickman's curiosity. Over the next several years, working carefully to avoid official attention, Pickman assembled the fragments of the Wainwright story presented here. His research notes, shared with trusted colleagues before his unexpected death in 1978, form the foundation of this account. The Wainwright property itself remains undeveloped to this day. Now officially designated as a watershed protection area, it is surrounded by fencing marked with warnings about environmental hazards. Satellite imagery shows the foundations of the main house still visible among encroaching vegetation, along with the distinct outlines of the 5 concrete structures that have never been explained. Local residents still avoid the area, though few could articulate exactly why. When pressed, most refer vaguely to bad ground or conservation rules. Older residents change the subject entirely. Perhaps most telling is what happened in 2003, when a cellular communications company proposed building a transmission tower near the northern edge of the former estate. Despite offering substantial financial incentives to the town, the proposal was unanimously rejected by the planning board without public discussion. The written decision cited only incompatibility with established land use designations, though no specific designations were referenced. What actually occurred at the Wainwright estate in 1901? What work was conducted in the chambers beneath the cellar, and to what purpose were the specimens collected and modified? The systematic removal of records has made definitive answers impossible. What we can say with certainty is this: something occurred on that property that prompted not merely its abandonment, but the coordinated effort of Salem's most prominent citizens to erase all evidence of the family's existence. Whatever Harold Wainwright was pursuing in his underground chambers was deemed too disturbing for public knowledge, yet apparently too valuable or dangerous for complete destruction. Elizabeth Marsh, the seamstress who visited the home shortly before the family's departure, perhaps came closest to articulating the fundamental wrongness that permeated the estate. In the final entry in her diary regarding the Wainwrights, dated October 2, 1901, she wrote, "I dreamed of the boy Thomas last night. In the dream, he stood at the entrance to a dark stairwell, beckoning me to follow. His mouth moved as though speaking, but the sounds that emerged were like nothing human. Most disturbing was his hand as he gestured. The fingers moved independently, as though each was controlled by a separate will. I awoke with the certainty that whatever dwells beneath the Wainwright home should remain there, undisturbed by light or knowledge. Some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed again. The concrete structures remain, the land remains vacant." And somewhere, perhaps in sealed county archives or private collections, the complete truth of what Harold Wainwright created in his cellar chambers remains as well, buried but not destroyed. Like the structures themselves, covered but not removed, some parts of history resist complete erasure. The old-timers in Salem still caution against venturing onto the northern property after dark. They don't mention the Wainwright name. It has been too thoroughly excised from common knowledge. But they know the land. They know which roads to avoid. And they know without being told that some sounds from below the earth are best left unheard. If you've stayed with us through this entire narration, we thank you for your patience. The story of the Wainwright family and their cellar may never be fully known. Perhaps that is for the best. As Judge Whitmore wrote in a private letter found among his papers, some truths are not meant for preservation. The mercy of forgetfulness is sometimes the only protection against realities too grotesque for peaceful minds. The former Wainwright property remains undeveloped, undisturbed, and unmarked on most maps, a silent testament to secrets kept, histories erased, and questions better left unasked. Our investigation into the Wainwright case continued to yield disturbing fragments long after Daniel Pickman's unexpected death in 1978. Pickman, whose obsession with uncovering the truth had consumed the last 5 years of his life, left behind a collection of research materials that his family initially intended to destroy. It was only through the intervention of his colleague, Marion Brewster, that these documents were preserved, hidden away in her attic for nearly 2 decades before being entrusted to our research team. Among Pickman's most valuable discoveries was a journal kept by Agnes Sullivan, who served as a cook at the Wainwright estate from July 1899 until August 1901, notably departing just a week before the family's activities intensified. Sullivan's journal, recovered from her granddaughter's possession in 1976, offers rare insights into the household's daily operations before the events that led to their erasure from Salem's history. "The house runs like no other I have served in," Sullivan wrote in September 1899. "Mr. Wainwright insists upon precise schedules for all activities. Meals are to be served at exact times, with deviations of even 5 minutes noted in his ledger. Most peculiar are the dietary requirements. Each family member receives portions prepared according to specific instructions, with the youngest boy, Thomas, given supplements misjudged. Wainwright measures himself from bottles kept under lock in his study." Sullivan's observations regarding the children are particularly unsettling in light of later discoveries. The twins speak rarely and never in the presence of their father. The daughter Margaret seems perpetually exhausted, though she retires early each evening. Young Thomas exhibits concerning symptoms, tremors in his hands that worsen after his father's examinations in the study. When I suggested calling Dr. Walters from town, Mrs. Wainwright informed me that her husband attended to all medical needs of the family. She added, in a tone that permitted no further discussion, that outside physicians lack understanding of our particular constitutions. By early 1900, Sullivan's entries reflect growing unease. The deliveries have increased. Packages arrive weekly from Boston, carried directly to the cellar by Mr. Wainwright himself. Twice I have observed glass vessels similar to those in apothecary shops. Most troubling was the large wooden crate delivered last Thursday, marked with warnings regarding fragility. The sound that emerged when the deliverymen tilted it slightly, a faint metallic ringing followed by what I can only describe as a wet sliding, caused Mr. Wainwright to dismiss the men immediately and oversee the remaining transfer himself. Sullivan's journal contains the first documented reference to the underground expansion that would later be discovered beneath the cellar. The sounds at night have changed. Previously, one might hear occasional movements from the cellar, Mr. Wainwright at his work, as he calls it. Now the sounds seem to come from deeper still, as though activities were being conducted beneath the foundation itself. The vibrations can be felt through the kitchen floor during certain periods, typically between midnight and 3 in the morning. Perhaps most disturbing is Sullivan's final entry from August 12, 1901, just weeks before Elizabeth Marsh's visits, and 2 months before the family's disappearance. Young Thomas did not appear for breakfast today. When I inquired after his health, Mrs. Wainwright stated only that he was undergoing treatment and would take meals in his room indefinitely. When delivering his lunch tray, I noticed the door to his bedroom was secured from the outside with a new brass lock. Through the door came sounds unlike any I have heard from the boy before, a rhythmic tapping followed by silence, then 3 distinct clicks. The sequence repeated precisely for the entire time I stood there. I have tendered my resignation effective the end of the month. Whatever illness affects the child, I fear it is not one medicine can cure. Sullivan's departure from the household was noted in Harold Wainwright's personal ledger, discovered by Pickman in 1975 in the collection of a Salem antique dealer who had no recollection of how the item came into his possession. The ledger contains primarily financial notations, but entries from August 1901 include a terse comment. Sullivan departure necessitates acceleration. Phase 3 to commence September instead of November. This timeline alignment with Elizabeth Marsh's visit suggests the seamstress unwittingly witnessed the Phase 3 Wainwright mentioned, a period when, according to subsequent discoveries, the family's activities intensified dramatically. It also corresponds with the first documented instance of unusual nighttime activities observed by neighbors, including George Porter's report of sounds unlike any animal known to these parts. The acceleration Wainwright noted may explain the apparent haste with which certain modifications to the property were completed. Archaeological assessment of the site, conducted covertly by Miskatonic University researchers in 1982 using ground-penetrating radar, revealed that the underground chambers extended far beyond initial estimates, a network of rooms and corridors covering nearly half an acre beneath the property, with evidence suggesting much of it was excavated and reinforced within a remarkably short period in the autumn of 1901. The report, never officially published but circulated among select academic circles, noted the subterranean structures exhibit sophisticated engineering inconsistent with construction methods common to the period. Particularly notable are the seamless transitions between original foundations and subsequent expansions, suggesting precision rarely achieved in underground modifications of existing structures. Of special interest are the unusual geometric patterns in which the chambers are arranged, not the rectangular grid one would expect for functional spaces, but concentric circles intersected by precisely angled corridors. Further insight into the possible purpose of these chambers came from an unexpected source discovered by our research team in 2012. While examining archived materials from Salem Hospital, we located a patient file for Eleanor Wainwright, dated April 19, 1901, approximately 6 months before the family's disappearance. The file had been misfiled among records from 1910, perhaps intentionally obscured. The examining physician, Dr. James Thornton, documented a consultation requested by a concerned friend of Mrs. Wainwright, unnamed in the record. His notes describe Eleanor as severely anemic with unusual dermatological manifestations, specifically a pattern of small, perfectly circular scarring at regular intervals along the inner arms and posterior neck. Dr. Thornton recorded his impression. Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with regular blood sampling, similar to those observed in research subjects. When questioned about these marks, patient became agitated and insisted they related to a family treatment administered by her husband for a hereditary condition. Most telling was Dr. Thornton's final notation. Patient refused recommended hospitalization and departed abruptly when I suggested consulting with her husband directly. Before leaving, she made a disturbing statement that her children were already responding to the modifications and that the changes, once begun, cannot be reversed without consequence. I have made inquiries regarding the welfare of the Wainwright children, but was informed by Judge Holbrook that the family's private physician has certified their good health, rendering further investigation unnecessary. This medical record establishes a critical connection. Judge Holbrook, the same judicial figure who later orchestrated the systematic erasure of the Wainwright records, was already intervening in matters related to the family months before their disappearance. His involvement so early suggests prior knowledge of whatever activities were taking place at the estate. The nature of these activities remained largely speculative until 1994, when renovation of the old Salem courthouse revealed a sealed compartment within a wall of the judge's chambers. Inside was a metal box containing several items: a leather-bound journal with the Wainwright family crest embossed on its cover, 3 glass vials containing unidentified preserved specimens, and a 16-page document titled Theoretical Applications of Biological Transmission Mechanisms, authored by Harold Wainwright and dated June 1898. County officials quickly confiscated these items, but not before the construction foreman, Michael Danvers, photographed several pages of the document. These photographs, which Danvers shared with our research team in 2007, provide the clearest insight yet into Harold Wainwright's work and intentions. Wainwright described a process involving systematic adaptation through calibrated exposures and surgical integration of conductive materials at key nervous system junctions. He specifically identified children as ideal subjects due to neuroplasticity and adaptive capacity, noting that familial subjects offer advantages of genetic consistency and control. Most disturbing was Wainwright's description of his ultimate objective. When fully implemented across multiple prepared subjects, the network will function as a unified system, each modified individual serving as a node in a biological transmission array, capable of receiving and broadcasting across distances previously thought impossible. The document outlines a disturbing theory that human tissue, when properly conditioned and modified, could serve as both receiver and transmitter of information beyond normal sensory perception. The military applications alone justify continued investment, though the scientific implications extend far beyond warfare. This reference to investment suggests Wainwright's work may have had financial backing, possibly explaining the coordinated institutional response to conceal its existence. The document included a handwritten annotation on its final page: Demonstration for S scheduled October 1901. Subjects 1-4 to be fully prepared by September 15th. The timing aligns precisely with the family's disappearance and the beginning of official efforts to obscure records related to the estate. The foreman's photographs captured only portions of the document, leaving many questions unanswered. However, they provide context for perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all, one made quite recently, and suggesting the Wainwright legacy extended far beyond what was previously known. In 2018, during expansion of Salem's water treatment system, workers uncovered a sealed lead box buried approximately 12 feet beneath an unmarked access road nearly a mile from the former Wainwright property. Inside was a glass jar containing a preserved human ear, surgically modified with fine metal implements embedded throughout the tissue. Attached was a handwritten note dated November 3, 1901. Subject 3, Margaret. Successful reception at 310 miles. Transmission quality diminished but detectable. Modifications to amplification mechanism in progress. Before authorities could secure the site, workers also partially exposed what appeared to be a narrow tunnel lined with copper plating extending in the direction of the former Wainwright estate. Within hours, the excavation was halted, the site secured, and all workers required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The official explanation cited unexploded military ordnance, though no military installations had ever been documented in the area. What these discoveries collectively suggest is far more disturbing than a simple case of unethical experimentation. Harold Wainwright appears to have been developing a biological communications network using surgically modified human subjects, potentially his own children, as nodes in a system designed to transmit and receive information through means outside conventional understanding. The underground chambers, with their precise geometric arrangement, may have served as testing grounds for this network, with the 5 concrete structures potentially functioning as relay points or amplification stations. The systematic erasure of records and physical evidence points to knowledge of these activities among Salem's highest authorities, who chose concealment rather than exposure, whether out of fear, complicity, or recognition that some discoveries simply cannot be reconciled with ordered society. Daniel Pickman, whose research forms the foundation of our understanding of the case, came to believe that the erasure served another purpose beyond mere concealment. In his final notes, written just days before his death, he suggested, "The careful preservation of certain aspects of the site, while methodically removing all official acknowledgement of its existence, suggests the work itself may have continued. Not actively, perhaps, but passively. Systems set in motion, and then carefully maintained through strategic neglect. The concrete structures remain untouched after nearly 80 years. The access points remain sealed, but not destroyed. Someone or some group has ensured that whatever lies beneath the Wainwright property remains intact, if dormant." This theory gained troubling credibility in 2020, when digital analysis of geological survey data revealed regular, low-frequency vibrations emanating from the area, vibrations that follow a precise 27-day cycle. When this finding was submitted to county authorities, the response was immediate. The researchers' funding was terminated, their equipment confiscated for alleged calibration issues, and their preliminary report classified under rarely invoked statutes relating to public health emergencies. The final piece of our investigation came from perhaps the most unexpected source. In reviewing census and immigration records for possible traces of the Wainwright children, we discovered that in 1942, 40 years after the family's disappearance, a man named Thomas Smith was briefly detained at Boston Harbor when attempting to return to the United States from Europe. Immigration officials noted inconsistencies in his documentation and subjected him to additional questioning. The interview transcript contains a curious exchange. When asked his place of birth, Smith initially stated Salem, then quickly corrected himself to say Salem, New Hampshire. When the interviewer commented on unusual scarring visible on Smith's hands, the man reportedly became agitated and demanded to speak with someone from the Essex County office, mentioning Judge Carlton specifically, a judicial figure known to have been involved in maintaining the silence surrounding the Wainwright case. Within hours of this interview, Smith was released and all issues with his documentation apparently resolved. The interviewing officer was transferred to another department the following week. Photographs taken during the detention show a man of approximately 50 years of age, consistent with the age Thomas Wainwright would have been, with distinctive scarring around his wrists and unusual metallic implements visible beneath the skin of his hands. The man, identified as Thomas Smith, disappeared from all records after entering the United States. His final documented statement, recorded by the immigration official, offers perhaps the most chilling suggestion that the Wainwright legacy continued long after the family's official disappearance. Father's work was never about communication as you understand it. The modifications were meant to connect us to something else entirely, something that exists in the spaces between conventional perceptions. We hear it still, those of us who survive the process. It speaks through us, though never in words you would comprehend. Our investigation continues, though with increasing difficulty. Research funding has been repeatedly denied. Access to certain archives is suddenly restricted for conservation purposes. Team members report unusual interference with electronic communications when working near the former Wainwright property. Perhaps most telling is the response we received when attempting to access soil samples from the site through official channels. The written denial cited no specific regulation, but concluded with a statement that perfectly encapsulates the institutional silence that has surrounded this case for over a century. Some grounds once disturbed are best left undisturbed thereafter. This matter is considered closed. But for those who have followed the fragments of the Wainwright story, nothing is truly closed. The chambers remain beneath the earth. the vibrations continue their precise cycle. And somewhere, perhaps, the last modified subjects of Harold Wainwright's experiment continue to receive and transmit, nodes in a network whose purpose remains as disturbing as it is unknowable. For those of you who have joined us on this journey through one of Salem's most deliberately forgotten chapters, we offer this final thought. Some histories are erased not because they didn't happen, but because they did, and continue to happen, beyond the boundaries of what we choose to acknowledge. The true horror of the Wainwright legacy may not be what occurred in that cellar in 1901, but what might still be occurring unobserved and undisturbed beneath the silent ground of northern Salem.